Foreign Minister Penny Wong is dangerously close to giving Hamas exactly what it wants, signalling that Australia could recognise a Palestinian state in the Middle East. The coalition are warning this is a win for the terrorists. Joining me now is Joel Burnie, Executive Manager at the Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council. Joel, is recognising a Palestinian state the natural conclusion to what we've seen from the Albanese government in recent weeks? They've shown they do not fully stand with Israel.
Thanks for having me, Rita. Well, let's just say it's been a very tough week and a half for the bilateral relationship between Australia and Israel. The rhetoric from the Australian government has certainly intensified after the very tragic and unfortunate death of Zomi Frankum. However, with the Foreign Minister's speech last night, in what she says in creating the framework for potential unilateral recognition, I think that has been rather consistent position of this government through successive ALP national conferences. This has been an adopted policy of the ALP for a number of years now. And even though there has been, I guess, a hesitation for the parliamentary caucus of the ALP to approve such unilateral recognition, which importantly the Jewish community and the Israeli pro-Israel community is against for many simple reasons.
One of those reasons surely is what would that look like? Who would be in charge of a Palestinian state? Because if there were elections today, it would probably be Hamas, if the latest polling is to be believed.
And that's critically important. So, you know, the government is trying to make a differentiation between Hamas and more moderate forces inside a Palestinian political society. I would make the very strong argument that the distinction between the two is very, very grey. Opinion polls recently in the West Bank, for instance, which is allegedly where the moderates rule, Hamas has significant support there. In actual fact, overwhelming support inside the West Bank. If elections were held, democratic elections were held in the West Bank, Hamas would probably win. So it's a question of, you know, you've got to be very careful with what you wish for.
Well, this is, we know, we mock the Palestinian Authority for not having elections, for, you know, having an election. How many years ago was that?
Oh, so now we're up to 19 years ago.
But one of the reasons they don't is because probably Hamas would win and win quite comfortably, and we would have another Gaza on our hands. Now, as Penny Wong said, it's not just Australia considering this option, but the international community. The US has been pushing for Israel to pursue peace for some time now, and now Senator Elizabeth Warren is out there insisting Israel is guilty of genocide. She made this claim at a mosque in Boston. What do you make of this? Because the Democrats have got all sorts of reasons why they are doing a U-turn on this issue. The Biden administration in the early days was a very strong ally after October 7, but we've seen them wavering, and the reasons for that are quite transparent. How do you see that crucial relationship between Israel and the US?
So I think there's a few factors to unpack there. Firstly, the timing is critically important in everything. So as you know the US very well, Rita. This is an election year. And so rhetoric of the fringes of both the right and the left are going to be amplified to push the main forces inside the Democrats and the Republicans to certain special interests. Inside the Democratic Party, there is an emboldened and very powerful progressive wing. Their positions on Israel, Palestine are very, very clear, and they are exerting as much pressure within that election year and within the context of that election year to pull the Biden administration away from its historic relationship with Israel. So I think that from a perspective of the alliance between the US and Israel, I think things are still currently intact. There is no daylight between the objectives of Israel and the United States administration in terms of defeating Hamas.
But like you said, you've got some very powerful forces within the Democrats. We're not talking about people on the fringes of the left. We're talking about veteran congresswomen, presidential candidate last time around. You've got the Squad, who have got enormous, disproportionate influence and power, if you ask me. And they do have a vulnerability in some of those swing states where there's large Muslim populations. So how do they handle that in election year? Because they do seem to be making a compromise in their support.
Well, for my suggestion, I would state that foreign policy very rarely has a huge impact in the general election in the United States. Economic issues, the cost of living and unemployment, things like this are really on the hearts and minds of Americans.
In some of those heavily Somalian areas, for example, where there was a recent election, those foreign issues are playing a big factor.
There's no doubt about that, but it comes down to leadership. If the United States decides to abandon Israel in its time of need right now, what type of message does that send to the Ukrainians, for instance? What type of message does it send to the American Arab allies in the region that are also facing the forces of the Iranian octopus, which is crucially causing a lot of mischief, not just in Israel, but throughout the whole region? So the consequences of America's departure from Israel is much broader than just the bilateral relationship between the United States and Israel. So I think that, and my hope is that the stronger and the more leadership-centric policies of the Biden administration will prevail over those very loud and dominant progressive elements of the Democratic Party.
Now, before you go, just quickly, the Albanese government has announced a special envoy for anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. They can't just do one, they've got to do both. Is this a positive move?
I'm unsure. Look, the Jewish community, for very clear reasons, it's very jarring to hear anti-Semitism and Islamophobia within the same sentence. We make the very clear position that the uptick in anti-Semitism has been the worst in Australia since the end of the Second World War, and we would expect that due to such a difficult time for Jewish people, that we would be able to at least have a discussion about our difficulties without bringing in other prejudices of other minorities, who some of those minorities happen to be perpetrators of anti-Semitism, as we know from the arrests. Yes. So I'd like to make the clear point that even though Islamophobia is a real thing, it is different from anti-Semitism in multiple ways, not just within the volume and within the quantity, but also in its nefarious, destabilising aspects and elements into the social cohesion of Australia. So whether or not it's a good thing or not, I would hope that the government does not use the appointment of such a person to again conflate anti-Semitism with Islamophobia, because that would be a problem. But I would like it to have some type of practical outcome that protects the not just Jewish citizens of Australia, but also make sure that we live in a cohesive, multicultural Australia.
Joel Burnie, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Rita.